Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Walt Rivera, and we're here with two guests. We have Steve Martinelli and Chris Privitere. We're going to be talking about Traceroute, and we're going to recapture some of the shows and talk about talk about a technical deep dive on some of the topics that they talk about. And so this specifically refers to the end of last season, which was season 2, where they talk about the mother of all errors. How do you prevent errors? That's a big, overloaded question. But let's just start simple.
I'm going to go ahead and say testing. What do you say, Chris?
I'm going to say you can't.
Oh,
The errors will always happen. So it's really more about how do you deal with errors when they occur and how do you minimize how often they occur.
I told Chris is that the way to prevent an error is just to not have one in the first place.
You just
And then
delete all
Chris
the
said,
code. Get rid of the code.
yeah,
That'll do it too.
yeah.
That's good.
Become, just like change jobs, right?
It's unfair. Like Doug was before we had all this process. Like Doug didn't get to benefit from any of this practice that we've got nowadays. So like, of course he had errors. Like, come on.
So what apps or technologies are you using in order to prevent your code?
To prevent my code, yeah, that's usually based on what language I write it in. But honestly, it's not.
Errors.
I would say it's not a matter of technology that prevents errors. It's a matter of process that minimizes errors. And so it's things testing, like Steve already said, and the process documenting how things are supposed to go, practicing it, and repeating it often. It's like you've got to do your process. You've got to see how things practice what happens when things go wrong and how you recover from them, and optimize both the recovery process as well as reviewing what went wrong and incorporating that into the fixes to make it better in the future. And that itself takes a lot of practice to get good at. So all those things kind of wrap up to kind of be a culture that minimizes errors. But also, like, there's like one other key component is that culture can't be focused on laying blame on people, because that encourages people to not report errors and not focus on errors, not want to talk about errors, because they just feel like they get in trouble and they're going to lose their jobs. Okay?
yeah.
That doesn't go where. So you need a culture of trust where people feel like it's okay to make mistakes and that you're all on the same team and you're going to be fixing those errors together. That's how I look at it, at least.
And so the show actually brings up a pretty good point, like where the show says that people have to learn how to embrace the error, because if you find the error, that means that your code is now better than it was yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than yelling at the person for finding the error or to create the error or to fire that person, which is not the right solution because you didn't fix the error.
You just spent a bunch of money training that person. Like,
Exactly.
Don't fire them. That you just invested in them. So now leverage that investment and let them get better at their job and improve your processes.
Yeah. Steve, thoughts?
Well, one of the things I really like about AWS are their incident reports, and that to me it's a good. They really just embrace culture in that regard of like they're very transparent about what went wrong. I remember there was like a big S3 outage few years ago, and it was very clear like something like tiny went wrong, and as a result just took down the whole thing. So I feel like just the way that they report it externally makes me think that they must have a really good internal process for handling these things.
So Steve, do you have any stories about how to introduce bugs when you push to production?
I've got not necessarily about that, but I've got two different stories I've got kicking around in my head I wouldn't mind sharing.
It's story time.
All right, story time. This is back when I was like a pretty recent new grad. I'm not going to say the year because then you're going to figure out how old I am. But we were running. This is before the Docker days, so we were running the same app. It was an internal app for sales teams to use, and we were running it like the devs would run it on their laptop and connect it to a pre-staging environment. Then we had an actual staging environment. Then we had a production environment that the sales team would use. And, we would push changes to the staging environment like once a month or so, whenever our sprint was done. And then our team lead would go and push the changes from staging to production. But it was sort of like at the end of that month. So you'd end up with like 10, 20, 50 changes all happening in batch at the same time. and the data that we had on staging was never the same as the data in production. It was just, so you ended up with oftentimes with these corner cases where you'd have a bug that only showed up on your dev environment, or only showed up in your staging environment, or only showed up in production. And then you'd have to, we'd roll it out, and then we'd get a bug report literally like the next day, or we'd see it and like something catastrophic happened, and we'd have to go in and immediately patch it. And to me, when Docker came out and it's like, oh, now you can replicate these environments and they're always the same, and I'm like, oh, I get it now. I get the value of this now. So you're not running into that issue that teams have been running into for a long time.
So part of it is have a good staging environment that mimics production.
Yeah, as close as you can. And I mean, like, I think Kubernetes and Docker and containers kind of brought that as close as it could be. I mean, I don't think it's always going to be the same, but you can get it pretty close.
But on top of that, I would say, once you have those environments, use them. So a lot of times people set up like these staging environments or these disaster recovery environments, and they just sit there and they never get tested. And then when they need them, they realize all these things that, oh, we didn't realize X, Y, and Z, which were never properly documented or talked about, don't work. And we didn't set them up here, and that they have to scramble to do it when everything's down. And you want to practice and do that stuff ahead of time. So it's having scheduled disaster recovery testing is like a huge thing for error recovery. Obviously, in the microservices world, you want to not be at the scale where you have to fail over everything. You want to be able to have little bits die and other ones spin up to take their place. And if your architecture supports that, first, good on you for building with the more modern segmented architecture like that. But also, you still need to test those. You have to make sure it works, right? And that's where you get like that. How long chaos engineering was always a thing where like, let's shoot pods in the head and just see what happens to our production application. Like NetApp would do that, or Netflix rather would do that.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people have adopted that, but I love that idea as something to strive to.
And they do it into like production too. It's not.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. Yeah.
In theory, I mean, having a microservice should make that contract that the service fulfills so small that errors should be less frequent, but that it should, like you said.
Well, you also have more bits that can fail.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
You just kind of, it's weird. You're kind of like, more errors are surfacing at different points.
Yeah, it's well said. You're embracing the errors. Like, errors are going to happen, and we accept it, and we have a culture where it's okay for them to happen. And that's not just amongst your people, that's also amongst your technology, your services.
But one thing that the show brings up is that an error 40 years ago was smaller than it is today, because today you're doing an error that you're pushing out, and you're doing $4 billion worth of like damage to a company or the stock price, or you're affecting thousands of microservices around the world. So it's not just like one little error of like for one video game that you shipped maybe 40 years ago. Now it's like a whole like, like this whole like infrastructure can be taken down for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 hours because of one bad like BGP instance or something that you forgot to, double check your line of code or something. So, I feel like that the errors today are so much of a bigger weight on your shoulders that when you're pushing to prod, you're thinking to yourself like, okay, has everyone seen this? Is it okay? And is everything going to go smooth? Because if not, then you hear from everyone at this point with big damages.
That's just the way things have evolved. I mean,
yeah,
you got to get really comfortable with pushing to prod. At a previous job, I mean, the first thing that you did on your first week, you had to push something up to prod. And
I love it.
Even if it was just a small little change or, to something fun like that, but it was highly encouraged. Like, yeah, just push something up to prod in your first week. It's fine. If something bad happens, we have all the right things in place to roll them back. And yeah, it was good. It was interesting. You're still nervous about it, even when they say it.
Yeah.
Still nervous.
So are things changed now because now that you're using Docker and you're using Kubernetes and that everything is like containerized? I mean, have the errors gotten less? Have they gotten more? Have they gotten, worse?
Different?
Yeah,
okay.
Difference the right answer. The errors just show up differently. The way you debug them is harder, I would say. because there's more places to check. And so that's why you have instrumentation, and log collection is such a big focus now. But also, we've got rise to continuous integration and continuous delivery, and like having these pipelines that are constantly doing end-to-end checks of the code you guys are committing, and trying to tell you about problems you're going to have in production before you have it. And it's like, yeah, breaking it all up was let the errors be smaller again instead of huge, but it means we have more of them, and we're learning to deal with that. And I think we're making progress. It's just that with these really big enterprises, the undertaking's massive, and so it's a commitment.
The best is when you push your code out and then nothing breaks, and then you go, "Oh, wait, that's not a good sign." Like, did I really,
did it even get deployed?
Yeah, did I miss a button somewhere? Like,
it is a bit of a weird mindset. I remember back, like, as a new grad, the way that we kind of pushed it to production was that, someone had to compile the Java code, zip it up into a jar file, or compile into a jar file, push it onto the HTTP web server, restart the web server every time, and do all these things. And it was like a Word document about how to do all this in your standard, like, 3-tier application or 2-tier with the database or whatever it was. And now, I've had the more modern problem where, like, yeah, we pushed something, it broke, but now rather than going through all that little process again, sometimes it's in a part of the code, especially if you're the one who caused the error. You're like, oh, I know it right away. Let me go and do this. Quickly write up a new PR, merge it, and then GitHub Actions or something will just take it and overlay the new changes on top. And it's like, wow, that was so much easier than the day-long endeavor that happened earlier. So in a way, it kind of got easier if you know enough about the code base to figure out really quickly where it happened.
You can break things faster and fix them faster.
Yeah, there you go. Succinct explanation.
So that wraps it up for this first episode of Localhost, all about Traceroute. And so I'm to remind you guys to listen to seasons 1 and 2 whenever you listen to podcasts, and make sure to follow us to get updates about season 3 coming out this fall. And my thanks to Chris and to Steve. And so subscribe and look out for us for the next episode.
All right. Bye.